Imagine for a second just being told to pack your bags right now. Like today.
Right. No warning.
Yeah, no warning at all. You have to leave absolutely everything you know behind. Your house, your neighborhood, your career, your entire support system.
It is terrifying to even think about, honestly.
It really is. And you aren't just moving to the next state over, You are forced to move to a place where the language is just completely foreign to your ears.
Oh, yeah. The daily customs feel entirely alien.
Exactly. And the very definition of what is considered right and wrong or, good and evil is just entirely different from yours.
It's a total dislocation of, well, basically everything that makes up your identity.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And usually, when we talk about a scenario like that, when we throw around the word exile, there is this built-in expectation of a purely historical or geopolitical event.
Right. You think of like a terrible refugee crisis on the evening news.
Yes, or political banishment.
Yeah.
You picture people being physically marched out of their country by some conquering empire. But today, we are taking a deep dive into this really fascinating stack of research notes and a profound core essay.
Yeah, titled Life in Exile, Faithfulness in a Foreign Land by Chris R. Velasquez.
Right. And this material takes that standard textbook definition of exile and just completely turns it on its head.
It really does. It argues that exile isn't just about geography.
Exactly. It says it is actually a condition of the soul. It is a moral pressure cooker, like it's a spiritual test.
Which is an absolute paradigm shift. If you are used to reading history as just a sequence of military conquests, the framework we are exploring today suggests we're actually looking at a state of being.
A state of being, yeah.
Yeah. The text redefines exile as a divinely permitted environment, a place where people have to learn what it actually means to belong to God before they can ever truly feel at home anywhere else in the world.
And what's so wild about this essay is that it establishes right out of the gate that the biblical narrative doesn't treat exile as some sort of accidental interruption.
No, not at all.
It's not a random detour where God's plan got derailed and he had to scramble to fix it. It is woven into the very fabric of the story.
Which brings us to the core of what we're looking at today.
Right. The ultimate question we are going to try to answer for you today as we dig through all this is this. How do you actually live faithfully when you are surrounded by a culture that simply does not share your worship, your ethics, or your ultimate hope?
It's the question of how to exist in a space that feels, inherently hostile to your deepest convictions, and doing it without losing those convictions or, frankly, losing your mind.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to figure out how to survive in exile, we really have to understand what it actually is on a molecular level and where it started.
Yeah, we have to go back to the very beginning.
Right. And there is a point early on in these notes that just completely stopped me in my tracks. When you ask most people who know a bit of biblical history what the first exile was, they'll immediately say Babylon.
Sure. They picture the Israelites being dragged off in chains.
Exactly. But this material argues that the first exile wasn't Babylon at all?
No, it wasn't. The framework places the first exile squarely in Eden.
Wait, really? Eden?
Yeah. Adam and Eve being driven east of the garden in the book of Genesis. That is the primal moment of displacement. After their transgression, they are expelled.
I guess I never really thought of it as an exile, but it totally is.
It absolutely is. The imagery is very stark. You have the cherubim and the flaming sword placed at the entrance, basically marking a barred way back to the tree of life.
Right.
And this isn't just a one-off punishment. It is the establishment of a deep pattern for all later human history. This primal expulsion is where human alienation actually begins.
And the essay breaks down that alienation into 4 distinct categories, which I found so helpful. It isn't just that they had to leave a nice garden and go farm somewhere else.
No, it was a complete fracturing of reality.
Right. So first, there's alienation from God. Like they are hiding in the trees, suddenly terrified of the presence they used to just walk with.
Right, that core intimacy is severed.
Then there's alienation from one another. Immediately the blame shifting starts, The man blames the woman. The harmony between human beings is just broken.
Yeah, the horizontal relationship is fractured right along with the vertical one.
Exactly. Third, they are alienated from the ground itself. The earth, which was supposed to be a joy to cultivate, now produces thorns and thistles, like work becomes toil.
It becomes a struggle to just survive.
And finally, there's alienation from themselves. They experience shame. They realize they are naked and try to cover themselves up.
It's this fourfold shattering of absolutely everything that was whole. which leads to an incredibly profound insight in this material.
What's that?
Well, the insight is that sin always displaces, disobedience always scatters.
Wow.
Yeah. The root of exile in this framework is not a geopolitical misfortune where a bigger army just came along. The root is rebellion. When human beings decide to define good and evil for themselves, the inevitable result is that they are driven from their true home.
So the world is no longer as it was designed to be, and human beings are no longer where they belong.
Exactly.
But what really caught my attention is that this isn't just an ancient history lesson about Adam and Eve or the Israelites. The material brings this reality right into the present day for anyone trying to live out this faith now.
Yeah, it draws a direct line.
It points out how the writers of the New Testament deliberately used this exact same language to describe the everyday reality of the early church.
Right, they really leaned into that exilic identity.
You have the Apostle Peter opening his letter by addressing his readers as elect exiles and sojourners scattered among the nations. You have Paul writing to the Philippians and reminding them, hey, your citizenship is actually in heaven.
It's a remarkable synthesis of the entire biblical narrative, really. What we are seeing is that the church is not Babylon, but it lives its entire life right in the middle of Babylon.
Yeah.
The early Christians were not living in a theocracy. They were a tiny, marginalized pilgrim community living inside the massive Roman Empire. And the arrival of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost didn't magically erase those exile-like conditions.
It just empowered them to be witnesses within that foreign land.
Exactly. It gave them the ability to endure it.
I was trying to find a modern way to visualize this for myself, for you listening. And the best I could come up with is this idea of being on a long-term corporate assignment in a foreign country.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, imagine your company sends you overseas to run a branch office in a totally different culture for, say, 10 years. You have to do your job well, you have to respect the locals, learn the language, pay your taxes, and really contribute to that neighborhood.
Right, you can't just ignore everyone.
Exactly. But you never, ever forget who you actually work for, where corporate headquarters is located and where your permanent address is. Your 401k is in a different currency. Your ultimate allegiance isn't to the city you are just temporarily renting an apartment in.
That is a very helpful way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
You are inhabiting a space, you are highly active in it, you might even deeply love the people there, but your defining identity is anchored elsewhere.
Yeah.
You are, to use a classic phrase, in the world without being finally of it.
Wait, hold on, though, because I can hear people pushing back on this. If my permanent address is heaven, and I'm just here on a temporary visa, why should I care about fixing the potholes in my earthly neighborhood?
That's a fair question.
Isn't this mindset just a recipe for complete apathy? Like, if the world is sinking ship, why would I waste my time polishing the brass? Doesn't calling yourself an exile just give you an excuse to disengage and say, well, not my problem?
It's a very natural assumption to make, and honestly, it's a danger the essay addresses head on, because people do fall into that trap. But the material argues the exact opposite. It says that the New Testament framework does not deny earthly responsibility. Rather, it radically intensifies it. But it intensifies it specifically under the sign of pilgrimage.
Okay, but how does being a pilgrim intensify my responsibility to a place I don't permanently belong to? That feels contradictory.
Because you are an ambassador. You are representing the home country, the kingdom of God, in the foreign land. The author calls life in exile the art of faithful presence under foreign conditions.
A faithful presence. I like that.
Yeah. If your hope is unmistakably anchored in a coming kingdom, you are actually completely freed to love and serve the current world.
Freed in what way?
Well, because you no longer demand that this current world be your ultimate savior. You don't need it to provide your ultimate comfort. You aren't withdrawing into fear, but you also aren't aggressively trying to take over.
Oh, I see. You aren't trying to build heaven on earth because you know heaven is coming later, so you can just focus on doing good today without the crushing pressure of trying to, save the world yourself. You have to hold this immense tension.
Precisely. You don't assimilate until you are indistinguishable from the culture, but you don't isolate into a holy huddle either.
Which brings us to the next massive concept in this material. We've talked about the anatomy of exile, this condition of the soul originating in Eden, but now we have to look at the historical mechanics.
Right, moving from the concept to the actual history.
Yeah, like why does a nation actually get sent into exile?
Right.
What is the purpose of it? The author uses this word over and over in the notes, a crucible.
And if you think about what a crucible actually is in metallurgy, It is a container designed to withstand immense, intense heat.
Right.
You put raw ore into it, you crank up the temperature, and the heat melts everything down. It burns off all the impurities in the dross, and it reveals the pure element that was hidden inside. The author looks at the nation of Israel's historical exile as the ultimate theological crucible.
Let's dig into that, because the text argues that Israel being invaded and deported wasn't just a random tragedy. It wasn't just bad geopolitical luck because they happened to be located between a couple of superpowers.
No, it was deeply theological.
Right. It was the direct moral consequence of something very specific, a covenant rupture. Now, we use the word covenant a lot in religious circles today, usually to just mean a nice promise, like a wedding vow.
Yeah, it's lost some of its edge.
But in the ancient Near East, a covenant was a much more severe, legally binding reality, right?
Absolutely. We have to understand this in the context of ancient suzerain vassal treaties.
Okay, define that for us.
A suzerain was a great, powerful king, an emperor. A vassal was a lesser king or a conquered nation. The great king would make a treaty, a covenant, with the lesser nation.
And the terms were pretty strict, I imagine.
Very clear. The great king would essentially say, I saved you from your enemies. Therefore, I will protect you and provide for you. But in return, you must be absolutely loyal to me.
Right, no side deals.
Exactly. You will pay me tribute, you will follow my laws, and you will not make alliances with any other empires or worship any other gods.
And if you broke those rules,
Then the treaty included very specific curses. The great king would withdraw his protection, bring his armies, destroy your cities, and scatter your people. The material points out that the Mosaic covenant operates on this exact logic, but with God as the suzerain.
specifically in books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, right?
Yes. Blessing would attend obedience, and severe curse would attend rebellion. God chose Israel, brought them out of slavery in Egypt, and gave them the land of Canaan.
But the land was never given to them as an autonomous possession. They didn't just own it outright to do whatever they wanted with it.
Exactly. It was a conditional lease. It was a gift held under strict covenantal stewardship.
And the ultimate penalty for violating that stewardship, like for turning to idolatry, for committing deep social injustice against the poor, for hypocrisy.
Expulsion from the land. Exile.
So, when the Babylonian Empire rolls in around 586 BC, destroys Jerusalem, burns the temple to the ground, and marches the survivors hundreds of miles away into captivity, the biblical prophets are standing there saying, this isn't an accident.
Right. They were saying God didn't lose a fight with the Babylonian gods.
This is the covenant curse being enacted. This is the crucible. But the material makes a really vital distinction here about the nature of this judgment. It says that in Scripture, this kind of judgment is never merely punitive. It is remedial.
And that distinction changes everything.
How so?
Well, if something is merely punitive, the entire goal is just to inflict pain as retribution. It's just punishment for the sake of making someone pay.
Right, just getting even.
But if something is remedial, the goal is to cure a disease. Think of it like a surgeon amputating an infected limb, or a doctor prescribing highly toxic chemotherapy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The chemo is poison. It causes immense suffering. But the goal of the oncologist isn't to torture the patient. The goal is to aggressively burn out the cancer so the patient can actually live.
So the judgment is designed to bring about a cure.
Yes, the aim of the exile wasn't destruction for its own sake. It was to shock the nation into repentance and bring them back to renewed covenant fidelity. It was discipline from a God who loves his people too much to let them permanently destroy themselves with idols.
And there is a line in this essay that perfectly describes how that chemotherapy of exile actually works. The author writes, when external supports are removed, hidden allegiances become visible.
That is the crucible doing its work right there.
It makes me think of what happens today when the power grid fails or when there's a massive internet outage. Let's say your home Wi-Fi goes down, and at the exact same moment, your phone battery completely dies.
A modern nightmare.
Truly, in that sudden silence and total disconnection, you find out almost instantly what you actually rely on to regulate your emotions and comfort yourself.
Right, you instinctively reach for the phone.
Yeah, and it's dead. You try to turn on the TV to distract yourself, but the network is down. You can't scroll, you can't text, you can't numb out. You are suddenly just left sitting alone in a quiet room with your own thoughts.
And that's when the panic sets in for a lot of people.
Exactly. You find out very quickly if you possess any internal peace or if you were entirely 100% dependent on those external digital supports to keep your anxiety at bay. The outage reveals your hidden dependencies.
That is such a good analogy for what exile does spiritually.
So how did this outage play out historically for the Israelites? What external supports got stripped away from them?
To understand the shock of this, you have to look at what they were relying on before the Babylonians arose. The prophets, especially Jeremiah, were sounding the alarm for decades. The people of Israel had started treating the temple in Jerusalem not as a place of humble worship, but as a magical talisman.
Like a lucky rabbit's foot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They believed that because God's physical temple was in their capital city, they were invincible. The logic was basically God would never allow his own house to be destroyed, therefore we can do whatever we want.
Wow.
Yeah, they were oppressing the poor, engaging in corrupt business practices, and worshiping other gods on the side, all while still showing up to the temple for the festivals, thinking the building itself guaranteed their safety.
They wanted the protection of the suzerain without having to actually follow the terms of the treaty.
Right. And the material points to a terrifying, highly symbolic vision that the prophet Ezekiel has right before the destruction.
What happens in the vision?
Ezekiel actually sees the glory of God, the manifest presence of Yahweh, literally get up and depart from the temple in Jerusalem.
The presence leaves the building. The Wi-Fi goes out.
It is a devastating theological statement. It proves that divine presence cannot be presumed where covenant faithfulness is absent. God will not be used as a mascot. So when the Babylonians finally breach the walls and burn the temple to the ground, it strips away the illusion. The exile destroyed the lie that faith could be sustained by cultural privilege, by social power, or by a majestic building.
It forced the survivors to answer a brutal question. Does your obedience remain when obedience no longer pays?
Exactly. When the institutions fail, when your status is gone, when you are a prisoner in a foreign land, who are you really worshiping?
That stripping away produces an incredibly specific type of pain. The author calls it the ache of displaced worship.
They're very profound, Sar.
He points to Psalm 137 to illustrate this. This is one of the most raw, heartbreaking poems in ancient literature. The exiles are sitting by the rivers of Babylon. Their captors are mocking them, demanding they sing some of their happy temple songs.
And they hang up their harps in the trees?
Yeah, they ask, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And I think the natural tendency is to read that and think, oh, they're losing their faith. They are doubting God. But the essay insists that this isn't unbelief at all.
No, the material's very clear. This is holy grief.
Holy grief.
Yeah, it is the pain of exile intensifying their longing for what is true. By refusing to just play along and sing a happy song for their captors, they are refusing cheap consolation.
Refusing cheap consolation, that is such a challenging concept for our modern mindset. We are so conditioned to immediately plaster a fake smile on everything, to throw out a cliche like, well, everything happens for a reason, or to just try and numb the pain.
Right, but they were learning to actually sit in the grief of their displacement. They had to learn to hope while sitting in the ashes.
So we see the anatomy of exile in Eden, and we see it operate as a crucible in Babylon, burning away the false idols. But that leads to an incredibly practical question.
Okay.
If you are an Israelite who has just survived a siege, been marched across a desert, and you are now living in the middle of a massive pagan imperial capital, how are you actually supposed to live day to day?
Right, what's the actual plan?
Yeah, your temple is gone, your land is gone, your king is gone. What is the daily blueprint? And the material points us straight to a letter written by the prophet Jeremiah.
Yes, Jeremiah chapter 29. The author identifies this as the absolute core text for understanding what it means to practice faithful presence.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if I'm in exile, I'm expecting my prophet to send me a letter that says, you know, stay strong, God is going to smite the Babylonians next Tuesday.
Right, hold the line.
Hunker down, isolate yourselves, don't talk to the locals, and keep your bags packed because we are breaking out of here. But Jeremiah tells them the exact opposite.
It must have been completely shocking to hear.
He tells these prisoners of war to build houses, plant gardens, marry, have children, and most shockingly, to seek the welfare, the peace and prosperity of the city of Babylon.
Build, plant, pray, seek the peace of the city. It is a radical mandate to invest. It is a command to work, to contribute to the local economy, to grow, and to provide for the community that is currently holding you captive.
The essay makes a brilliant observation about this. It points out that Jeremiah's command strictly forbids the two most natural human reactions to being placed in a hostile culture: triumphalism and withdrawal.
Let's break those down.
It forbids triumphalism, meaning You don't try to conquer Babylon. You don't start a violent insurrection. You don't try to seize the levers of imperial power to force everyone to act like Israelites.
And it also strictly forbids withdrawal.
Right. You don't build a separatist commune in the desert. You don't create an isolated subculture where you sit around hating Babylon and waiting for it to burn.
Yeah.
You are commanded to actively pray for its peace.
And we get a masterclass in what this looks like in practice by looking at the life of Daniel. The material uses Daniel as the ultimate case study for this exilic blueprint.
Right, because Daniel isn't a farmer out in the countryside. He is living right in the blistering heat of the crucible.
Exactly. He is drafted into the Babylonian imperial court and later the Persian court. He is a high-ranking administrator for the very tyrants who destroyed his homeland.
He is literally working in the west wing of the evil empire.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that his life demonstrates that exile is not a license for retreat or for cynical compromise. The author points out that Daniel models steadfast fidelity without ever surrendering his public vocation.
He still does his job well.
He serves pagan kings with absolute integrity and excellence. He shows that faithfulness can survive and even thrive deep within the administrative structures of an empire.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic for a second because the line here seems incredibly blurry to me.
How so?
Well, if I'm Daniel and I learn the Babylonian language, I read all their literature, I take a Babylonian name, and I spend all day every day making the Babylonian economy stronger, how am I not just a Babylonian?
That's the tension.
Right. Where is the line between seeking the welfare of the city and just totally assimilating into it until my distinct identity is completely gone?
That is the tightrope walk of exile. It is the tension between engagement and distinctiveness. The essay uses the phrase moral distinctiveness as the boundary line.
Okay, explain that.
You are seeking the common good. Absolutely. You want the city to flourish. But your witness as an exile is maintained through embodied holiness. It isn't just about what you say, it's about where you draw the absolute moral line.
So, using Daniel as the example, he's building and administrating the city, but where does he actually draw the line?
The material points to several key moments. In Daniel chapter 1, he draws a line at his dietary decisions. He refuses to eat the king's rich food and wine.
Which, to modern ears, seems like such a small, almost petty thing to argue about. Why risk your life over a menu?
Because in that culture, eating from the king's table wasn't just about nutrition. It was an act of communion. The food was likely sacrificed to Babylonian idols, and eating it was a symbol of total dependence on the king and submission to his gods.
Ah, I see.
Daniel engages with the education and the work, but he refuses the communion. He draws another line in his prayer life later on.
Right, the lion's den.
Exactly. He insists on praying to Yahweh, even when a royal decree makes it a capital offense in Daniel 6. He will serve the king, but he absolutely refuses to worship the king or his idols.
He seeks the city's peace, but he refuses to adopt the city's gods.
Exactly. These might seem like small acts of rebellion, but the author argues they are what preserve his larger witness. You contribute to the welfare of the city, but you absolutely refuse to let the surrounding cultural norms define the limits of your obedience to God.
You don't compromise your core allegiance just to make your life easier or to get a promotion in Babylon.
No, you don't.
You serve the city, but you do not surrender your soul to it. That requires an incredible amount of spiritual fortitude. Now, up to this point, we've been very focused on specific historical moments.
Right. Eden, Babylon, Daniel.
Exactly. The root in Eden, the national crucible in Babylon, the daily survival guide in Jeremiah. But this essay does something really ambitious next. It zooms way, way out.
It looks at the whole picture.
Yeah, it wants to show us that this concept of exile isn't just a recurring theme. It is the central theological spine that holds the entire cosmic narrative of the Bible together.
It provides a massive, sweeping 12-part arc of the grand narrative. And taking the time to walk through this arc is vital because it proves that exile is not a parenthesis in the story. It is the mechanism by which the story moves forward.
Let's trace that arc step by step so we can see how the author builds this argument for you listening. Where does the story actually begin?
It begins in eternity, before time, before creation. There is eternal communion within the life and purpose of God. Perfect relationship.
And then comes creation.
Right. Humanity is created in an environment of complete harmony. They are given a vocation to reflect God's rule, to cultivate the earth, and to enjoy unbroken fellowship.
And there's a crucial point here about that, right?
Yes, the essay makes a vital point. Exile only makes sense, it only carries weight, because creation was originally a place of intimate communion and high calling.
You cannot be exiled from a place you were never meant to belong to in the first place. You can only feel homesick if you actually had a home.
Beautifully said. Which makes the third step so tragic. The fall.
The rupture we discussed earlier in Eden, humanity chooses autonomy over obedience, the alienation begins, and we inherit a permanent condition of estrangement. We are outside the gates.
But from that state of estrangement, God initiates covenant. This is step 4. It is his merciful, structured answer to fallen humanity. He makes promises to Abraham, he rescues Israel, and he structures their national life under Moses.
He gives them the law to show them how to live in relationship with him.
Right.
But as we saw with the Babylonians, that covenant makes disobedience much more serious. It raises the stakes, which leads to step 5, redemption.
God repeatedly rescues them, most famously in the Exodus from Egypt. But the material points out that every historical rescue, every Exodus, always pointed beyond itself. Rescuing them from Pharaoh did fix the root problem of their own rebellious hearts.
Which necessitates step 6, the kingdom.
The promise that God himself will break into history and establish a righteous reign. But because of Israel's repeated covenant failures, the arc loops into step 7, exile.
The scattering among the nations, the crucible we talked about, followed by step 8, restoration, a promise that God will gather the scattered exiles back, restore their fellowship, and renew their vocation.
And all of these steps, all of these tensions, all of this history converges like a laser beam on step 9.
The Messiah.
Yes. And this is where the essay's theology becomes incredibly rich. It refers to Jesus not just as a teacher or a king, but as the true exile and redeemer.
I really want to drill down into the mechanics of that because it's such a fascinating framing. How exactly is Jesus an exile? I mean, he wasn't deported to Babylon.
No, he wasn't. The material argues that Jesus enters into the human condition of exile in order to end it from the inside out. He recapitulates or relives the story of Israel, but he does it without ever failing the covenant.
Okay, so Israel failed in the wilderness. Jesus spends 40 days in the wilderness and successfully resists temptation.
Exactly. But the ultimate climax of this exilic identity happens at the cross.
Explain how the crucifixion functions as an exile.
Geographically and theologically, the cross is the ultimate displacement. Jesus is taken outside the city gates of Jerusalem. He is cast out by the religious leaders of his own people. He is executed by the pagan Roman Empire.
So he is completely rejected.
Yes, and on the cross, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The author argues that in that moment, the Holy One's cut off.
Oh.
He is voluntarily bearing the covenant curse we talked about earlier.
Wow. He is absorbing the fourfold alienation of Eden into himself, being separated from the Father so that the exiled human race can finally be brought home.
He goes into the far country of death and alienation so he can lead us back. That's incredibly powerful theology.
It really is. And that reality shapes the remaining 3 steps of the arc, right?
It does. Step 10 is the church, the community that continues his witness in the world. Step 11 is judgment, the final reckoning where all wrongs are set right. And finally, step 12 is the new creation,
where God comes down to dwell with his people forever, and the condition of exile is permanently ended.
Yes, that's the full arc.
Now, I want to circle back to something about step 10, the church, because there is a theological concept in this essay that really threw me for a loop.
Well, what was it?
We just said that Jesus, the Messiah, has arrived, brought the kingdom, and dealt with the curse of exile on the cross. So naturally, you would think that for Christians, the exile is over. But the essay argues that the arrival of the kingdom actually intensifies the experience of exile for the faithful.
Yes, it does.
How does that make any sense? If the king is here, shouldn't we be feeling more at home, not less?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes perfect logical sense within this framework. Why does the kingdom intensify exile? Because the advent of God's true rule sharply exposes the current world's rebellion.
Exposes it how?
When Christ comes, he draws a hard line. A sharp division appears between those who submit to his loving rule and the systems of the world that reject it.
Ah, I see. Because the true king has arrived, the illegitimate powers that are currently running the world feel incredibly threatened. So the contrast between the two kingdoms becomes much sharper and much more visible.
Exactly. And the material introduces a very specific theological term for this. It says Christian exile is cruciform.
Cruciform meaning cross-shaped.
Yes. Because the church is united to a Messiah who is rejected and crucified by the world, the church inherits a share in his exact pattern of life.
So a cruciform life means you should expect suffering before glory.
Precisely. It means you offer witness before you receive vindication. It means you bear a cross before you wear a crown. You belong to a king whose earthly throne was a Roman torture device.
So it is wildly inappropriate for you to expect your experience in this world to be a parade of constant triumph, comfort, and cultural dominance.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? We've covered this massive, deep theological ground from a garden in Eden to the burning of Babylon to the mechanics of the cross to the future new creation.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But the author knows we don't live in the abstract. We live in the messy reality of a Tuesday morning. So the final section of this material brings all this cosmic narrative right down to earth for you. It serves as a practical survival guide for the modern pilgrim. Let's walk through these practical implications.
Okay, where do we start?
The first major area the author tackles is how we construct our identity and pursue holiness.
The essay argues that a true exilic mindset forces believers to stop trying to root their identity in cultural approval, political dominance, or social visibility.
If you understand you are in exile, you stop desperately seeking the applause of Babylon.
Right. The church is not called to be impressive or relevant by worldly standards. It is called to be faithful. Measuring the success of your life or your church by how much cultural influence you have, rather than by your obedience to God, is a profound confusion.
Exile corrects that. And regarding holiness, it makes a point that I think is deeply convicting. It says that assimilation, just blending in, is always the easiest way to avoid friction. Oh, absolutely. If you just agree with whatever the surrounding culture says is good and true, the pressure stops. You won't get mocked, you won't get canceled, you won't get fired.
But true holiness is refusing to let the surrounding norms dictate the terms of your obedience. And I have to quote this line directly from the notes because it is so stark. It says, "Holiness is not a luxury for the spiritually elite. It is the grammar of survival."
The grammar of survival, I love that. It's the vocabulary you must use every single day just to maintain your distinct identity. If you stop speaking the language of holiness, you forget who you are.
The author then moves to the practicalities of public engagement and leadership. We've already touched on the engagement aspect with Jeremiah 29, seeking the welfare of the city.
Right, contribution without compromise.
But the advice specifically targeted at leaders in this environment is really fascinating. It says that exilic leadership must be marked by steadiness, not frenzy, by fidelity, not fame, by a long obedience in the same direction, not by chasing spectacular novelty. It strongly warns leaders to resist the temptation to borrow the world's aggressive, manipulative methods to try and achieve spiritual ends. It says leaders are called to be stewards of promises, not a mastery of results.
Stewards of promises, not a mastery of results. That is a fundamental shift in how we view success.
A mastery of results implies that you actually possess the power to control the outcome. But in exile, you are profoundly aware that you do not control the empire.
You do not pull the levers of history.
No, you cannot force a revival, and you cannot guarantee political outcomes. All you can do is faithfully steward the truth God has given you, love the people in front of you, and help them interpret their cultural moment without giving in to panic or cynicism when the results are slow.
Which flows seamlessly into the essay's deeply challenging point about suffering and prayer. The text warns that expecting a life of constant ease is spiritually disorienting.
It is a terrible setup for disappointment.
Yeah. It argues that we need to actively normalize suffering as a standard part of faithful discipleship. It states that suffering, while painful, can actually refine our faith and clarify what we are truly hoping in. But I'm going to push back here because this is where theology hits reality.
Let's hear it.
It is basic human nature to want to fix suffering, to avoid it, or to escape it. If we adopt this exilic mindset and just say, well, we're in exile, suffering is just part of the package, doesn't that inherently make us passive?
That's a very common fear.
Like, doesn't it lead to a kind of fatalism where we stop trying to cure diseases, stop fighting for justice, and just accept misery as our lot in life?
That is the danger of misunderstanding the concept, but the author clarifies this beautifully. Normalizing suffering is absolutely not passivity.
Okay, good.
It doesn't mean you go seeking out martyrdom, and it certainly doesn't mean you refuse to alleviate suffering in your community where you have the power to do so. Remember, you are still commanded to seek the welfare of the city.
So what does normalizing it actually mean then?
It means that when hardship inevitably arrives, specifically the hardship that comes from living a morally distinct life in a culture that opposes those morals, You aren't spiritually destroyed by the shock of it.
You don't immediately throw your hands up and assume God has abandoned you or that the universe is broken.
Right. And the text makes a beautiful observation here. Christians who experience the stripping away of exile often discover that the absolute deepest consolations of God are not found in his external gifts, but in his internal presence.
Oh, wow. So the focus shifts from frantically praying, God, change these circumstances right now, to praying, God, be intimately present with me while I walk through these circumstances.
Yes, and that is why prayer becomes so vital in this framework. The document notes that in exile, prayer isn't just a polite ritual, it is urgent, because it constantly reminds the believer that they are not the ones controlling history.
And the author specifically highlights the absolute necessity of the Psalms of lament, right?
Yes, lament, giving voice to the pain.
Lament gives authorized biblical language to our holy grief. The essay says that prayer in exile is not a private therapeutic hobby. It is an act of spiritual resistance against despair. It is honest, non-performative worship rooted in desperate need.
A church that learns to lament well also learns to hope well.
That is a massive paradigm shift for anyone used to just singing upbeat songs every Sunday. Now, knowing what you're supposed to do is only half the battle. Knowing what you absolutely must not do is just as crucial.
Oh, definitely.
In the final section of this material, the author outlines 5 massive dangers. The common traps that believers fall into when they misinterpret their situation. Let's dig into these because they feel incredibly relevant to how people are behaving right now.
Let's do it.
The first danger is treating exile as a permanent defeat.
This is the trap of despair. If you believe the exile is the final word, it leads to spiritual minimalism. You just give up.
You stop trying to build or plant anything.
Right. But the biblical narrative insists that exile is always bounded by promise. The God who sends his people into the crucible is the same God who promises to bring them through it and back home.
As the essay so beautifully puts it, faith does not deny the darkness of the current moment, but it absolutely refuses to enthrone the darkness as king. Exile is a harsh season, but it is not the end of the story.
Well said.
The second trap is practically the defining characteristic of our modern moment, confusing exile with cultural warfare.
This is an incredibly dangerous trap. It's the temptation to turn the experience of exile into a perpetual, exhausting posture of hostility and anger toward the surrounding culture.
But the text is explicit. The exilic people of God are absolutely not called to hate the nations among whom they dwell. They are called to bless them.
The temptation to define faithfulness as political conquest or culture war dominance is completely alien to the exilic pattern we see in Jeremiah, in Daniel, in Jesus, and in Peter.
You are an ambassador sent to offer a message of reconciliation, not a conqueror sent to wage a war of attrition. The third trap is the exact opposite extreme, collapsing into assimilation.
If you realize you aren't supposed to fight the culture, the easiest alternative is to just absorb it. You lose all your distinctiveness.
The church ceases to look any different from the world, which means it completely loses its ability to speak prophetically to the world.
And the author uses a fantastic phrase here. He warns that Babylon must not become the church's hidden catechist.
The hidden catechist.
Yeah.
Okay, a catechist is a teacher of the faith. So a hidden catechist means that Babylon is secretly educating your soul, teaching you its values, while you aren't even paying attention.
Precisely. It's like a social media algorithm. You don't realize the algorithm is shaping what you desire, what you value, and what you fear until you are already completely assimilated into its way of thinking.
That is terrifying.
The pressures of modern Babylon, the endless push toward comfort, radical consumerism, and self-exaltation, are incredibly subtle and overwhelmingly powerful. If you aren't actively and intentionally remembering who God is, Babylon will gladly instruct your desires for you.
The fourth trap is reading every single hardship as a direct, punitive punishment.
This raises an important question about how we view pain on a personal level. We talked earlier about how the national exile of Israel had deep covenantal roots. They broke the treaty. They faced the macro-level consequence.
Right.
But the text strongly warns against applying that exact same simplistic moral arithmetic to individual personal suffering.
Right, like the terrible assumption that, oh, I got sick or I lost my job, therefore I must have committed a specific hidden sin and God is punishing me right now.
Exactly. The document points to the entire book of Job and to the teachings of Jesus in John 9 to completely dismantle that kind of thinking. An overconfident, arrogant diagnosis of why someone is suffering is just dangerous.
Yes, hardship can sometimes be disciplinary, but it can also be profoundly formative, right?
And be missional. Or it can simply be the tragic reality of living as a fragile human being in a fallen, groaning world.
Hmm.
Wisdom requires us to resist oversimplifying pain.
And finally, the fifth trap, forgetting the already not yet tension.
This is one of the most vital theological concepts in the New Testament. It is the tension between the inauguration of the kingdom and its final consummation.
Break that down for someone who has never heard that phrase before. What is the already and what is the not yet?
Think of it like World War II. Christ's death and resurrection is D-Day. He has landed on the beach, the decisive victory has been won, the enemy's ultimate defeat is guaranteed.
That is the already.
Yes, the kingdom has been inaugurated.
Right.
But we have not yet reached VE Day. The full, visible, worldwide manifestation of that peace hasn't arrived. The war is won, but the fighting, the suffering, and the casualties still continue. That is the not yet.
The essay argues that believers fall into a ditch on either side of this tension. They err when they expect heaven now, demanding perfect health, perfect justice, and a pain-free life before VE Day.
And they also err on the other side when they act as though nothing decisive has happened yet, living in total despair as if D-Day failed.
The proper posture, the exilic posture, is confident, active waiting. As we finally bring this deep dive to a close, let's pull all these threads together and synthesize the core message.
Let's do it.
According to this profound framework, life in exile is the delicate daily art of faithful presence. It is about holding an incredible, almost impossible tension. You are commanded by God to build houses, to plant gardens, to marry, and to actively pray for the welfare and prosperity of the city you are trapped in.
You contribute your skills, you deeply love your neighbors, and you engage with the culture.
But simultaneously, you keep your lamps lit. You refuse to bow to the local idols. You fiercely maintain your moral distinctiveness. Your daily posture is not one of frantic panic about the news cycle.
It is not a bitter nostalgia, pining for some past golden age that probably never existed.
And it is certainly not a slow, cynical compromise with the current culture. It is steadfast, immovable trust.
And through all the building, the planting, and the weeping, we have to remember the final destination. The author makes it abundantly clear that the crucible of exile is not the final chapter of the human story.
Right.
The biblical narrative is a massive arc that moves from a lost garden in Eden to a brilliantly restored city garden, the New Jerusalem described at the end of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
It points toward a physical, tangible reality where God finally comes down to dwell permanently with his people, where every tear is gently wiped away, and the ancient curse of Eden is finally permanently lifted.
The scattered and the expelled are finally brought all the way home. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. Think about the times in your own life when you felt a deep, almost unexplainable pang of homesickness, even when everything in your life seemed perfectly fine.
We all have those moments.
Maybe you were surrounded by friends laughing at a dinner party, or you were sitting in your own comfortable living room, and out of nowhere, there was this lingering, quiet sense of displacement, a feeling that you didn't quite belong.
It's a very real ache.
If the massive biblical narrative we explored today is actually true, and our ultimate guaranteed destination is a fully restored creation where we dwell perfectly with God, then maybe that feeling of not quite fitting in, that ache of spiritual restlessness, isn't a flaw in your psychology.
Maybe it isn't a problem that needs to be fixed with more therapy, more distraction, or more success.
Maybe it is actually the most accurate internal compass you possess. Maybe it is the ultimate proof that you were brilliantly designed for a world that simply hasn't fully arrived yet. Keep building, keep planting, love the city you are in, but keep your eyes fixed firmly on the horizon. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.